Welcome and good evening, everyone. My name is Marcel Jaspars. I'm the Vice President International of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, which is Scotland's National Academy. We try to promote research and innovation partnerships for Scotland around the world, collaborating with leading international science academies. The Royal Society of Edinburgh is pleased to host this event, which is jointly organised between the Royal Society of Edinburgh, the Council for At-Risk Academics, and the Young Academy of Scotland. It's a second such lecture. Last year's lecture was by Bertrand Ramcharan from the United Nations on Scotland's contribution to human rights. I'd like to welcome tonight Professor Klaus Zimmerman of the United Nations University Merit in Maastricht, the Netherlands. I look forward to his lecture on migration, challenges and perspectives, which is of global vital importance. I'd like to speak briefly about the RSC and human rights. The RSC, together with our sister academies in London, the Royal Society, the British Academy, the Academy of Medical Sciences and the Royal Academy of Engineering, has formed the UK Academy's Human Rights Committee. This network, in turn, is part of the International Human Rights Network. The Human Rights Network assists scientists and scholars around the world who are subjected to suppression, severe repression solely for having non-violently exercised their rights, as given by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The UK Human Rights Committee will act only when an individual's human rights has been violated due to the reasons directly associated with their research or academic or scientific work. We are very pleased to be part of this network, which supports academic colleagues around the world. The RSC is committed to standing against injustice and standing for equality. The RSC has demonstrated this commitment over many years, and most recently through our ongoing activity, including our Young Academy of Scotland programme, supporting at-risk academics and refugee professionals, our Human Rights Network, supporting at-risk academics internationally as part of the UK Human Rights Committee, and the establishment of an RSC Africa Working Group for Mutual Exchanges. Furthermore, over the past 5 years, the RSC has hosted discussions on slavery, empire and colonialism. However, it is clear we can and must do more to ensure that our work does not contribute unwittingly to perpetuation of structural inequalities, that we take a long look again at how well we tell our history. I'd like to pass on to Michael Worton of the Council for At-Risk Academics to introduce their work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcel. It's a great pleasure for us to co-host with the Royal Society of Edinburgh and Young Academy of Scotland. CARA's origins go back to 1933, when leading academics and scientists in the UK founded what was then called the Academic Assistance Council in order to rescue their colleagues in Germany from Nazi persecution. Since 1933, we at CARA have been dedicated to rescuing academics around the world who need to flee their homelands in order to escape conflict, arrest, or persecution. The precise reasons why they are at risk vary greatly, but they are all attacked or persecuted because of their views, because of their ethnicity, because of their faith, their sexual mutation or gender identity, or simply because they're academics. Our first core aim is thus to help at-risk academics by bringing them to sanctuary, academic and social sanctuary in the UK and increasingly in other countries, so that they can continue with their academic lives. We are the leading organisation of its type in Europe, and indeed we're unique in the world in our focus on those who are in immediate danger in their home countries or regions, rather than already in exile, as other organisations do. We're also unique in providing 2 or 3 year award packages as standard, rather than just 1 year, so that our at-risk fellows can have a chance to establish some kind of real life. We're currently supporting 300 fellows, plus 450 of their dependents. And at the moment, they come from 20 countries. The largest number come from Syria, 45%, then from Turkey, then from 10% from Yemeni, as you might well expect at the moment, but the others come from all around the world, from all 5 continents. We have another core aim, which is to advance higher education globally by supporting academics in countries where their work is at risk or compromised. We ran, for instance, a very successful Iraq program from 2006 to 2012, and a Zimbabwe program, a very different program from 2009 to 2013. And in 2016, we founded our Syria program, which is still running, and which provides Syrian academics in exile in the region with opportunities to develop their academic skills in teaching, research, professional development, and so on. And especially to provide them with opportunities to network with academics throughout the world and be connected properly for the first time for many of them. We have nearly 500 academics on our database on the Syria program, and about 140 are currently actively involved in research projects and developing their academic skills. Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, once wrote, I think very beautifully, that migration is an expression of the human aspiration for dignity, safety, and a better future. And our mission at CARA is to try to ensure that the forced migration of all of our fellows does indeed bring them and their families dignity and fulfillment in a place of safety. I look very much forward to listening to Professor Zimmerman, but hand over now to Alice König.
Thanks very much. So I'm Alice König, one of the co-chairs of the Young Academy of Scotland, and we're really delighted to be teaming up with CARA and the RSE once more to host another joint public lecture on a topic of huge importance. I'm a Roman historian, and one of the most famous Roman poems that I teach is the Aeneid, set nearly 3,000 years ago. Its hero, Aeneas, is a refugee from Troy, that's in modern Turkey, who flees his war-torn home, carrying his father and his son. He travels over land and sea, there's a shipwreck, and he founds a new civilization in the place where he was washed up. Rome itself did not exist until Aeneas came and made it his home. That's the foundation story of the Roman Empire. Now, I mention that partly to underline something that we all know, that migration is not a new thing. It's always been part of the human experience. The history of humanity is a history of migration. But this Roman poem also reminds us all that we can tell the story of refugees and what they contribute to society in all sorts of different ways. Migrants can be the heroes of national myth, and they can be celebrated for transforming the place that they reach. Members of the Young Academy of Scotland are really passionate about helping to tell this side of the story. Our mission as an academy is to help Scotland's people and policymakers build a future that is equal, inclusive, sustainable, and international. And I just want to mention a couple of initiatives that we're particularly proud of. Knowing how much asylum seekers can contribute to society, we have developed a dedicated recruitment scheme for at-risk academic and refugee members. It's our ARA scheme. We run workshops to help these members regain some of the professional skills that they may have lost during their displacement. Our ARA members have the chance to make new contacts and build professional networks around Scotland. And in turn, YAS benefits enormously from their talents, experience, and unique perspectives. And if any of you want to find out more about our ARA scheme, the RSE is running a discussion event on the 26th of October where some of our members will be sharing their experiences. Two of our ARA members work directly on refugee integration and support in Scotland. Another of them, Deborah Kayembe, is raising fresh awareness of the racism that many continue to face in Scotland. And another one, Ala Hamdan, has worked together with other YAS members to found Mosul Book Bridge, a campaign group which has been helping to restock the Central University Library in Mosul, where Ala is from, which was destroyed by ISIS after they captured the city in 2014. Our ARA members really do take our work in some amazing directions, which we would never have dreamed of without them. YAS members are also doing some important work in the wider human rights arena, including a project to support the likely incorporation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scottish law. And we're also doing some advocacy work calling for a renewed commitment to human rights in the higher education sector as universities forge more and more international research and teaching partnerships. So this public lecture is just one of the ways in which we want to continue to talk about and support refugee integration, human mobility and human rights in Scotland. And as I said, we're very glad to be co-hosting it with RSE and CARA, and very grateful to Professor Klaus Zimmerman for accepting our invitation to speak. Professor Zimmerman is a German economist and emeritus professor of economics at Bonn University. He's also an honorary professor at Maastricht University, at the Free University of Berlin, and at the Renmin University of China. He co-directs the Center for Population Development and Labor Economics at UNU Merit, which is a research and training institute established by the United Nations University. And he is president of the Global Labour Organization, an international network of researchers, policymakers, and practitioners who investigate the societal impacts of global labour markets and demographic challenges. His research focuses on the intersection between population change, changing labour markets, and migration. And in his talk, he's going to discuss both the challenges and opportunities of human mobility in our rapidly evolving world, looking particularly at what migrants contribute to society. He's going to talk for around 25 minutes, and then there will be about 20 minutes for Q&A. If you have a question you want to raise, please type it into the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. You can do this at any point during the talk, and we'll then put a selection of those questions to Professor Zimmerman when he's finished speaking. I want to note that this event is being recorded and also live streamed on the RSC's YouTube channel, so anyone can catch up with it at a later date if they want, and please do let friends and colleagues know if you think they'll be interested. All that remains for me now to do is to hand over to Professor Zimmerman and ask him to begin his talk on migration, challenges and perspectives. Professor Zimmerman.
Thank you very much, Alice. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a real pleasure to be here and be in charge of this important event and be able to talk to you about this one and very important topic. Let me first begin the sharing procedure. I hope you can in a moment see what I see. Now, my topic is migration, challenges and perspectives. And since the work done academically and with the policy orientation is very broad, so naturally this topic has been covered by many sciences and disciplines, and certainly what I have to present is in a certain way selective from my glasses, but hopefully with an emphasis which is of importance to you and which is a good basis for our exchange later. I have 5 parts basically, with a short conclusion. Introduction, the challenges I see for human resources globally, expectations we should have on the process, the benefits, or some of them we can see, and then finally conclusions. Let me start with some introductions. And how can I start better than with Adam Smith, who has some close relationship to Edinburgh, of course, and who is one of the heroes of economics and beyond. And like any good economist, he was concerned about the optimal allocation of resources, the division of labor, and well, as I will work out, then also as a consequence, this has to do also with the merits of labor mobility, the benefits of trade, and the question of openness as a basis for global welfare. Well, scarce resources, just to replicate what we all know, that, well, we are facing scarce resources in real life. And we have to make sure that the resources we can share for producing goods to provide scarce goods and services are effectively used. And if you reach that, we have something like the optimal allocation of resources, we have the maximum welfare we can create, and all this is achieved if all resources are used best. Now, Adam Smith was the person who made clear to us, to the world, for forever, that the division of work serves the optimal allocation of resources. It is the basis of the wealth of nations. And Adam Smith has artfully, and I cite him here, we don't have to go into it, but he has artfully explained that in his book and documented it well, how important it is. Now, the merits of labor mobility in this context means that labor migration brings scarce resources to where workers are needed. National and international migration improves the division of work. Mobility can reduce, for instance, disequilibrium situations and adjusts for shocks in various areas and avoids the negative consequences. So at the end, migration, mobility in general is welfare improving. Well, openness is the basis for global welfare. That's the vision or mission I have for you this evening. Now, have we been very open? As many people say, oh, we are too open, we have globalization and it's a threat and a problem and all this is too much. Well, the world was more open before World War I, at least with respect to, let's say, migration and with respect to financial integration, not so much with trade openness. We are much better, or have been much better until recently. And but all in all, the world, as I say, has been more open before World War I than it's now. And the time in between was not always good times, not because necessarily directly, but indirectly because of the lack of openness and willing to collaborate across the globe. Nevertheless, our products and services are global, so we cannot avoid globalism in general, even if there are sometimes challenges going on with globalism as it goes on with economic change and economic challenges in general. That's part of what we see. Now, if you look around and you see through the glasses of, let's say, labor, human resources person, we have to see the following big challenges we see with COVID and without COVID. Let's kind of start talking about COVID at the end, but trade and internet has been for long a challenge, robots and artificial intelligence. Then we have demographic imbalances, in particular nowadays or in the future coming from the continent Africa. We have urbanization, we have climate change, refugees, populism, and well, these days again, COVID-19. And when we have had seen a trend in recent years, in particular fueled by populism, that we should go away from globalization, be more national, ignore the others. Well, COVID-19 is a perfect additional challenge to make this all even more problematic. But we also see the dangers. Now, let me quickly go through these keywords before I go more deeper into the migration and refugee field. Now, all imported goods and services carry foreign labor, so we cannot avoid competition with labor in general if we not close the borders. Yes, all exported goods and services carry native labor. The gig economy is also global. You may not like the gig economy. There are many disadvantages, but also advantages, but it's also a global thing. Globalized work is increasingly virtual work through the internet. So we have, and we will see that in the future, virtual migration. Well, automation takes place and will affect all types of work. Well, are robots and artificial intelligence and new migrants even more threatening for some? Well, not necessarily. What we see from research is also that fast robot adoption generates substantial output gains by companies in the middle term at least, and leads to substantial net job gains. So there is not necessarily a fear about robots and artificial intelligence, and I would argue later that's also not true for migration. Well, we have lots of demographical changes. We see a global slowdown in population growth, but that's not so much the key issue. The key issue is that we have demographical imbalances. Over the next 40 years, well, we see that Europe and China is aging and shrinking significantly. However, India and Africa is growing heavily, and in particular, also Nigeria in Africa is exploding. This means India needs to create 10 million jobs annually over the next 40 years. Africa, 20 million jobs every year. So the population size of India will soon surpass that of China's. And the migration pressure on Europe and China will become huge. So Europe and China somehow in this sense, in the demographic sense, are somehow in the same situation and have to, I think, cooperate with Africa on a solution. Australia and the United States are fairly stable in that context. Well, then we see urbanization, we more and more live all in cities. That's the message here of this very long run picture. And this will go on, it will not stop, even with the internet. Now, the next thing is climate change. And of course, the Earth is heating up, there's no doubt about that. And this brings all kinds of issues. It will bring a rise in diseases caused by global warming, and it will create shortages of water, and it will displace many people. And this will be very likely millions if things are going as they can be predicted at the moment. This will lead to migration, as the other issues I've mentioned before. Well, refugees, lots of fears going on with refugees, and well, particularly economically, but also else, cause their unemployment, well, takes them, do they come to pick up welfare, do they bring crime, do they create uncertainty? Well, all this is heavily undoubt, and the evidence is not very convincing on these fears, but they are there in society. Of course, any change will affect ethnic and cultural identities. And of course, there is in part of the population a loss of control, a feeling which we have to observe and to take care of. Now, if it comes to Africa, then I already mentioned that there are big imbalances. Now, at the moment, there is this picture that Africa is the continent where floods of illegal migrants enter Europe. If we look at the refugees, the size around the world and migration around the world and the refugee size in Africa, so we have to realize that most of the African refugees stay in Africa. Only 14% of African refugees are among global migration flows. So it's not an immediate image which is correct if this is shown by the media. Certainly the big challenge is that over the next 40 years, we have to create additional jobs, or we as Africa has created additional jobs for 800 million people. And the question is how this can be done. That is something which we have to face more openly if we want to think in the further future. Now, all of that around is populism. It's not a new experience, and the fight between evidence-driven and interest-driven policymaking is a natural constant. Scientists like us have the duty to commute such findings to affect this battle. And of course, I vote for evidence-based policy making, and there is no excuse for accepting the global trend towards populism. And I mean, I don't have to talk about Brexit tonight, I cannot, because this is a very different topic, but it's also related, as you all know, to a misunderstanding, at least parts of the population, about some of our migration, of the migration experience. Now, COVID-19 as a last challenge, which has now come up, something which can replicate soon in other ways with other diseases in the future, is coming strong again. So we have currently across Europe and also in the world observe the second wave, and we see what one has to do and can do to fight this by shutting down the whole economy, societies, countries. So some things people like me have always said is impossible to do are now done overnight, and this is sometimes quite shocking how fast this can happen, and maybe also has to happen to a certain extent if the threat should not take over us. But I was happy to publish as an editor of the journal Population Economics one of the first studies in China dealing with this issue, and we have learned from that study early on already in the last months that stringent quarantines, social distancing, and population outflow are the major keywords for dealing successfully with this challenge. Okay, now here we have to realize that the coronavirus reaches the world at different speeds and levels of strength. And research I've been involved with shows that yes, globalization has to do with a faster speed and scale of the distribution of the disease, but globalized countries are also more able to deal with the fatality rates, the mortality issues coming back altogether with this development. Now, this all has very much a kind of a replication with what is called the Spanish flu about 100 years ago, where we had something similar, but already well, much more of size and importance. But it was clear that after World War I and the so-called Spanish flu, the world was shutting down for long, and that was not good, I would argue, and we have to see how we can avoid that these days. Now, what are our expectations? There's a lot of migration research evidence which tells us something how migration in general and refugee streams, how do they affect the economy, and how do the migrants and refugees perform? What kind of challenges do they have? And we also could draw lessons from EU enlargement, where we have always seen that this enlargement was, because of migration and mobility, all in all very beneficial, with not so much negative effects for the natives. This is basically what migration research tells you. Migration generally benefits the economy if it's labor migration. Yes, it improves the allocative efficiency of labor markets, it helps adjustments, there's brain circulation, and of course there are new goods through the variety and diversity of migrants, which is good. It's not good if we all would be alike. The miracle is that you have to be different. That it really matters for the economy to expand. And the migrants themselves, all in all, have benefits through taking up jobs. What we see, at least over large parts, not only in Europe, but around the world, that migrants come for jobs, not for welfare take up. They also help people and left behind at home. Also, inequality in foreign labor, it's not true that more countries with a larger share of foreign labor are less equal. They are more equal. So it's not as this graph shows. Well, also, there have been simulations before the pandemic, of course, COVID-19, and that research has shown if you would open borders around the globe, it would be much better for global welfare than now. How much? Okay, it's difficult, but at least the tendency is very, very clear. Nevertheless, long before COVID-19, we have seen a substantial rise in walls and fences, and you see alone between 1980 and now before COVID, there was a rise between countries from 10 border walls and fences to 80. That is quite a signal, which maybe has not been seen so directly, but it has happened over time. Now, what's about refugees and the labor market? What is in economic terms means assimilation? Here we mean economic assimilation, not cultural assimilation. People can stay very different, and that's an advantage. As I said, diversity is an advantage. Well, if you look at refugees, 80% in Europe, 80% of all refugees are in EU member states. Yes, Germany, the UK, Sweden, and France. There are typically low language qualifications. Refugees are closer to the labor qualities of family migrants. There are traditionally large restrictions on mobility and labor market entry for asylum seekers and refugees. They are more difficult to find jobs than other migrants have, and assimilation is very slow, and people are often stuck in the occupations taken up at entry. So typically refugees need 20 years to adjust employment to equal natives and other migration groups, but that's not so special for Europe. You also can find that, let's say, for instance, in Australia is an example which has a little bit different setting. Well, what do refugees to us, the natives, so to speak? Yes, refugees are often seen as an instrument to see a causal effect, because, well, refugees are coming out of the blue from the economy. There's a shock, there is a war, political decision, and then people move. And this is the advantage for research, that there is kind of an experimental setting in an artificial setting, which is important for the quality of research you can do. However, also refugees rightly come not only to survive, but they come also to live and contribute. And they can. There is nothing wrong that they are moving where they find other related friends and families, and where they also find jobs. So jobs and refugees belong together, and it's a fair suggestion to do so. However, some people fear negative effects on employment. A lot of research has been done on this, and I have to say that well, there might be eventually here and there negative effects, but they're very small, and all the research in this area hasn't really found big effects on employment, and also none on wages of natives. Now, there are possibly even favorable effects for complementary natives, those who are not alike the migrants. So if you have a lot of mass professors coming in, well, native mass professors might be more in trouble. But well, the other people in the economy which are benefiting, so that's meant by complementarity. Also, often natives can upgrade in their jobs. That's called occupation upgrading. They get better jobs, yeah, in general, refugees can, as we have recently, for instance, seen in Turkey with the Syrian refugees. Well, the effect, even when they worked illegal at the beginning, the affected native Turks, yes, a bit in the informal sector, but had positive welfare effects due to falling prices and better services. Now, let me come to my last important point. There are many benefits coming next to challenges, which are also there, but many benefits coming with respect to migration. And I would bring in 2 points which may be a little bit surprising for you if you have not followed that particular literature. Well, migrants are more accepted if there are many. Yes, you may say, oh, that's trouble. If there are many migrants, well, should not natives be feeling bad or threatened? No, that's not true. Migrants are more accepted if there are many. I come back to that. And second, migrants make natives happy. Yes, and you may not say, oh, well, that's quite surprising. I have, well, if I read newspapers, I don't read about this. Migrants are more accepted if there are many, is the first point I would like to make. There has been a Gallup's World Poll study. It's a big, thick research report where over 180,000 adults across more than 140 countries were surveyed. And countries with 10% or more migrants of the population are the most likely to have an opinion about immigration levels, and they are more likely to be positive than negative. So if there are many, in terms of more than 10% as a threshold, then that looks different than if there are only few. I come back in a second. Explanations could be that with higher percentages of migrants, natives have a greater chance to interact with migrants, and this might promote greater acceptance. You often observe that resistance against migration is in areas where there are no migrants. and so it's more what you think, and if you see people, and that's part of the secret of integration. You have to see role models, and you have to see people. At least that is would help in many countries. Now, here you see the numbers from that study I was mentioning, and you see that the green part here in this figure, which refers to those who disagree that one needs more migrants. They want to decrease the level of migration. That goes up first from smaller size in the population to middle size, and then goes down again. And over 10%, there is the most positive feeling in the respective countries around the globe. My last point is, well-being of natives is higher with more migrants, because migrants around means there is a possibility that there are positive effects on natives, which natives not even realize from where these positive effects come from. There's a lot of research out there measuring happiness, well-being, also depression and bad feelings in populations. And this data has been used by quantitative researchers since a long time to study what we can learn out of it. And so the life satisfaction of the natives in the presence of migrants has been one of the many studies. And the results show a positive and robust effect of immigration on natives' well-being, which is not driven by local labor market characteristics or other characteristics natives have. Now, this has to do with more and better and less expensive goods and services provided by migrants. And of course, in these studies, migrants were not aware, so to speak. This was not part of the analysis of the sources of their own extra happiness, which was condensed out of this research, all published in academic research journals. Here below are two of these papers which are out there. Now, let me come to my last, so to speak, slide and come to the conclusions. Challenges are out there, but probably taken, there are also chances, and we have to grab these chances. It is unlikely that globalization and migration will stop in the long run. We may see in the next years a substantial decline in that, but it will not go to the good of the world. I don't believe in this. Continued global collaboration is needed to fight temporary losses of prosperity and well-being. To ensure global prosperity and well-being, to increase the wealth of the world, we have to trust in the division of work. So that's what I'm voting for here in Edinburgh, so to speak, in the virtual situation. This is the legacy of Edinburgh and Adam Smith. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Klaus. That was a fantastic talk. You gave us a lot to think about, some really startling statistics, and also some really, really interesting material, which I think profoundly challenges some of the assumptions that many of us have and that many of us hear about the impact, the costs and the benefits of migration. And it was fantastic that you were linking that in with Adam Smith there, and this idea of increasing the wealth of the world and trusting in the division of labour. I want to raise some of the questions which people have already started putting. And at this point, I also just want to encourage anyone else in the audience to throw their questions into the Q&A tab so that we can raise them with Professor Zimmerman. The first question that popped up, I think perhaps resonates maybe with people in Glasgow in particular. So there were a number of there've been a number of quite high-profile challenges for asylum seekers in particular in Glasgow recently, where their mental and physical health has really suffered due to coronavirus and their sort of movement out of accommodation that they were in and so on. So the first question is asking really how assuming that we are perhaps going to be seeing an increase in migration and so on, how can we ensure that people's healthcare is not neglected, that migrants' healthcare in particular, which is a real challenge, is not neglected? Is that something you can speak on?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in health care as such, but it's clear that, I mean, we also see that you don't have to go, so to speak. We first should look, of course, in our own countries, but we know that in the south of Europe, in the refugee camps, there are many people who are even were willing to take over and to bring to safe also health conditions. We were not allowed to bring in. I mean, there were hundreds of German cities who volunteered to take over now in the crisis of refugees, but because we were not able in Europe to agree on a global deal, we couldn't do it. So that's part of the tragedy. But of course, within the country, I don't. Well, at least I mean, I have no idea about the UK and the UK health system. In Germany, at least where I know I live, it's very normal that people who are here, who are in our support institutions, are getting the standard health care. So I have to argue that I do not know enough to understand the Glasgow problem. What is there? Of course, we have, as the values of Europe and the member states of Europe have agreed on certain human values, and the human value includes not only that we have the willingness, when we are ready to take people who are refugees, who are in danger and in need, but also to provide basic services like healthcare. So that, I would say, is part of the standard which a modern state has to offer.
Thank you. Another question that's come through, which I think is potentially related, is just asking if you could maybe recap on exactly how you quantify the well-being, how you quantify the well-being of natives, and the way in which migration impacts on that. Or the other way of asking it is, what we most often hear about is how you quantify the costs to natives. So if you can just recap on how you quantify that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So well-being research is a huge, let's say, industry in research in economics, but also in other disciplines. Since many years around the globe, in fact, in all countries, we have huge microdata surveys which are asking batteries of questions about well-being, about health conditions, about factors is individuals are concerned of, like education and whatever age and labor market experiences and so on. And now and also, I mean, psychologists, for instance, have generated many measures how to identify well-being. So this includes depression, but also happiness. So this is a battery typically of questions like, how do you feel? Or have you thought, had you had bad feelings the other week, or things like that? And all this is measured on a quantitative scale, and that's aggregated. And this data has been evaluated for its relevance since long in many studies, whether it's meaningful. So after decades of work, so to speak, people now think that this is relevant. And now we can now condense, let's say, take this data set for natives, yes, and we control for many things what these individuals, we have a kind of well-being function. So what is determining well-being of individuals? For instance, income, or I mean, family structure and whatever. And then we can control for other factors, environment and so on. And then at the end, we have then the local share of migrants as a regressor, and this is kind of then evaluated. So one can quantify that contribution. And that's how it is is done. So the reference I had in the presentation are some of the many studies which are showing this quantitatively. So this is all what we call statistics or regression analysis.
Thank you. On a slightly different tack now, you mentioned at one point in your talk that Australia and the United States are perhaps likely to have are less worried, shall we say, about an increase in the number of migrants compared with Europe and China. And one of the participants wonders if you might talk through what factors are at play there. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a good point. This has to do with the more healthy demographic structure both areas of the world have. As the United States have a much younger demographic structure, so they are not aging so much as Europe or China. Yes, Europe and China is imposed. Yes, we know how it has worked, and Europe, well, this is what people have chosen over years to do. Now, Australia is a continent which is easy to close down from outside. Yes, it can very artfully select the people they want, at least in the past. It's a very effective selection of people. So Australia has enough, at least in the past, before COVID, there's enough people who would like to go to Australia, and also be young there. So, and many Asians in the past, I was teaching in Australia and was traveling, Australia is a very colorful, I mean, in terms of ethnic diversity country, and many, for instance, of the universities, there was a huge boom. And then it's known that Australia, the most important export good is not something for mining or whatever, it's education. Yes. How all this will develop in the future, where maybe education is under competition virtually, we will see. But Australia is a country of immigration which has managed things very successful, and the United States, well, at least in the past, got lots of people coming. People like Donald Trump misread that this will be in the future easily like that, because Mexico is also has population, moderated population growth, and not so many Mexicans coming if the borders would be freely open. Yes, so things may change a bit, but at least for the next decades, one can see that Europe and China and India and Africa, we are the four big regions which have a huge demographic imbalance and a very open a border, so to speak, whatever you may think. Yes, and that's why we have to think carefully how we share the benefits we get from artfully organized and managed migration.
Thank you. And some of the figures that you mentioned in your talk were really staggering. I've got a very different question now from Michael Bompong about perhaps an increase. One of the things that he's interested in is gender differentiation, and perhaps an increase in the number of female migrants. And he's wondering also whether female migrants in particular suffer more inequality than male migrants.
That's certainly true. That is called the double disadvantage migrants have. Well, in Africa, internally, 50% or 48 or so percent of the internal migrants are females. Yes, that's a huge, this is more than the feminization of migration, which is sometimes how it was called. But if we see it from our societies in Europe, there certainly we still have certainly here and there problems of migrants to integrate, in particular if they come fresh in as refugees, with language issues, if they are not second generation migrants, and there females have a much more challenging situation for the various reasons, because they also often have to carry a larger burden than even is normal in European countries with respect to household and family challenges.
Thank you. Another question now, now taking a slightly more positive look. is thinking about, you've argued powerfully for the positive impact of migration on economic development for the countries that that benefit from migrants coming to them. And the question is that positive impact linear? Is there a point where countries reach a kind of optimal level of migration?
Yeah, that we do not have, you're right, that's a good point, or the question is a good point. When we talk about moving from 3% to 10%, that is a lot for many countries. Yes, Switzerland has 29 or 8 or something like that. That's much more, and it's still a very successful economy, and it lives a lot of on migrants also, even if it's not always admitted that it's because of this. So yes, so certainly the question is certainly, as long as this development goes with integration in a positive sense. If when I talk about integration, that doesn't mean that you assimilate culturally. That I'm not a fan necessarily of saying who comes to, let's say, Germany has to become German in the sense that he's, of course, he has to identify with the nation in a certain way. We can fairly ask for that, but nobody is forced to give up his own ethnic identity and cultural heritage, including the languages. To the contrary, I would argue these are advantages for, and there's a lot of also research showing this, that diversity is a positive factor for the economy, and hence, so that is as long as this goes in the process which the previous majority or the old society doesn't feel to be overtaken. That's I don't see a particular specific limit. Yes, I mean Cyprus is also has lots of immigrants. In some countries we have lots of immigrants, and there is also, I mean, let's say Romania or Bulgaria or other countries in Eastern Europe. But often, and this is an example of that, is with respect to Poland, for instance. We have seen lots of Poles coming in to Western Europe through England and Ireland through EU enlargement. But many of them never left freely the country. They came back and forth, and they also returned at some time. So we will see in the future much more what is called circular migration, where we see people coming and going. So often in the public debate, we see migration just as people coming and flooding us and whatever. Take the 2015 debate. Let's say in my country, Germany, we have a million or so was more than a million were coming, so to speak. Yes. But also more than a million were, well, not 1 million came, 2 million came at that time, more than 2 million, but 1 million left out again at the same time. So where there's inflow, there's also outflow. So we have to, in particular, if it's about economic migration. So migration has to be seen a little bit more relaxed, as long as people are free to choose where they can live and work. There is a lot of regulation which goes on, which is helpful for society.
Thank you. That makes me wonder if you can tell us, help us visualize a little bit more what you mean by virtual migration.
Yeah, that's a hot topic which was already there a long time ago, but was not yet so well in practice realized. I mean, we are producing, yes? As academics, we know already quite a lot what this means. Yes, so if you publish nowadays a discussion paper on a website of a university, you have typically many co-authors. Yes, and if you ask the authors where they have done the work and how, then you will see that large of this work has been done outside and not well separately, but also separately, but in coordination with each other. So so more people are working through the web. So, for instance, what is called this economy, gig economy, means that there are small jobs which you daily can acquire in the internet, and you get money for doing things. And it's like working as your own entrepreneur or yes, self-employed person. And well, this is a trend anyway in before COVID. Now COVID forces us to really use technology like we are doing now. Yes, this is also I'm working in Edinburgh at the moment in a way. Yes, so to speak. Yes, but I'm doing it from here, and we can talk with all these many people, and this will look simple, but it has very powerful and effective effects which will explode in the future and will take a much larger share in what we produce and how we deal with each other.
Thank you. I want to fit in two more questions before we finish. One is something that a couple of people have asked, which is, what role do you think charities, community support groups and so on should play in helping to assimilate and support migrants and refugees relative to local government and national government?
Yeah, that's a very important point, and I've seen this also in the refugee wave, so to speak, we had in Germany in 2015. Lots of normal people said, I want to help and want to integrate. We want to bring people into soccer clubs or into to make music together and or help them to find jobs and so on. And so volunteer work is certainly very important, and non-profit organizations and charities are, I think, are becoming more and more important in the future of work also, I would argue, and that can be a very powerful thing. And also, I mean, of course, the organizations of migrant organizations, also ethnic groups, can help, because they can, as we know that from research, integration in societies in a host country has a lot to do with the contacts migrants have with their own ethnicities. Yes, the own ethnicities are the first step to find contacts, not to establish socially, but also economically, to find a job. That's a very important source of finding jobs. That's why I think what we have seen growing needs to be more support, and we cannot just wait for governments solving the problems.
On the subject of governments, my final question for you is, again, something that someone else has asked. So you've painted us an incredible picture of the future, where millions of people will be moving around the world, as you put it, in a circular way, not necessarily in just simply one journey. You've also advocated for open borders, for ways in which we might share the wealth of the world. Do you have one piece of advice that you might give to UK politicians, or indeed politicians in your own country, that will help us achieve some of the things that you've argued for in this talk?
Yeah, my point is, of course, and when I tell you my opinion, people will say, oh, this man is crazy, we don't know how to trust him. No, I'm joking. The point is, what I want to make is, even, okay, COVID is a special situation, and we have to restrict mobility in a certain way, but not in general. This is not against open borders, it's about the right behavior. Behavior is more important, cautious behaviors. There have been diseases before, and there will be diseases after COVID, and COVID will not go, by the way, overnight. So we have to live with COVID, in my view, for a long period. So we have to find a way how to deal with this, and open borders is as such not an argument against it. So my argument is, who's a refugee has to follow. I mean, has to be taken anyway. However, who is a labor migrant should be allowed to work if he or she gets a job offer, and if he has no job, the person has to leave at some time. That would be the kind of screening of the labor market, which will make things much more easier. And what we know from history is that the more open the country is, the less mobility is going on at the end. We have seen this with EU East enlargement, or with the fall of the wall with respect to Eastern Europe. So that would be my message. Openness is helpful to solve the problems.
Thank you, Klaus. That's a really interesting and important message to hear. And as I've said, it goes very much against an awful lot of what we hear in the press and what we hear from politicians at the moment. You've given us a fantastic talk, which showed us the importance of looking at history, as well as stats and economics and welfare and well-being and so on. Thank you very much for discussing those issues and for such a wide-ranging talk. You've certainly given me an awful lot to think about, and I'm sure that's true of absolutely everyone who was listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.